The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Wisconsin.
Secretary of Education Arne Duncan has called education the civil rights issue of our generation. It is also the case that Duncan has more resources at his disposal than all of his predecessors combined. We'll discuss how those resources are likely to be targeted and what we know about what works. Next, during office hours. Hi, I'm Ken Goldstein, Professor of Political Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Joining me today to discuss the state of education in America and emerging federal policy is Professor Adam Gamoran. Gamoran is a MacArthur Professor of Sociology and Educational Policy Studies at UW-Madison and Director of the Wisconsin Center for Education Research. Using a variety of methods, he has evaluated scores of educational programs across the country and around the world and has advised the current Secretary of Education. Adam, thank you very much for joining us today on Office Hours.
My pleasure, Ken.
President Barack Obama recently in Madison to discuss education, one of his major education speeches, and he started his speech with some claims about the state of education in America today. Let's look and listen to him make those claims.
The United States, a nation that has always led the way in innovation, is now being outpaced in math and science education. A handful of states have even gone in the wrong direction, lowering their standards at the very moment that they should be raising.
How are we doing? He made a claim that we're not doing very well compared to the world.
Well, the President's right. When we look at international assessments of achievement, for example, the U.S. is about in the middle of the pack, sometimes even below that. When we look at high school graduation, once the U.S. was the world's leader in high school graduation, now many developed countries have eclipsed us, and our graduation rate has been stagnant since the 1970s. About 3/4 of our young people graduate from high school within 4 years, more if you give it more time, but in much of the developed world it's 80, 90, even higher %, and we're behind that. And then when we look at who's going to college, again, it used to be that no one topped the United States in the proportion of our population going to four-year colleges and getting degrees. That's no longer the case. Ken, the rest of the world has just caught up.
So, I have to say, for someone like me who's a casual observer of education politics, it seems like it's a little bit of a Groundhog Day. President Bush came into office. No Child Left Behind was actually a major bipartisan bill. And my understanding was No Child Left Behind was supposed to, one, make things better, and two, states were supposed to raise standards. And in President Obama's comments there, he made the argument that states are actually lowering standards.
Well, unfortunately, the President's right again there. And the reason for that is because of a major flaw in No Child Left Behind. Under No Child Left Behind, schools do not get credit for making progress with students. They only get credit for where their students are performing at a given point in time relative to some standards. So if you have a school with a challenging population, maybe they come from a different difficult environment, maybe they have challenges in their home environment that makes it difficult for them to succeed in school, then you don't get any credit even if you're making progress with those kids. So what states have done in order to try to make it easier for schools to cross the threshold is they've simply reduced the threshold. They've lowered the bar.
It's No Child Left Behind is a federal program, but the states get to set where the bar is?
That's right. One of the compromises of No Child Left Behind, in order to avoid a federal system of education, of course education is fundamentally a state's right, not a federal responsibility. So one of the compromises was to say that, okay, if states want federal money to support education, they must establish standards and assess student performance to see if the students are meeting those standards. But what the standards are is up to the states to set. And we know because we do have one assessment that's given across the nation. It's called the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP. So we can see based on that assessment that some states set their own standards very high and some set their own standards very low. And in response to schools not meeting their own rigorous standards, instead of supporting schools to meet those standards, they've lowered the bar.
So if I'm so two things. One school could be passing in state A and failing in state B.
Correct.
And frankly, if I'm a state administrator and a state legislator, I have an incredible incentive to lower the bar, or I'm going to be in trouble, and my state's going to get punished with less money.
So what we need to do, Ken, instead of that, instead of evaluating schools based on their absolute performance at a given point in time, we need to monitor the progress of individual students and give schools credit if they're advancing the achievement of students over time. Right now, under No Child Left Behind, we're mixing up which schools are effective and which schools are ineffective. If a school takes in a group of students that's initially low performing, even if they make progress, if they don't hit that bar, they're deemed ineffective. And meanwhile, a school could have a high achieving population to begin with, and if they don't make a lot of progress, they're still judged effective because they're above the threshold.
Okay. Let me jump in there. I think you were talking about what's called value-added education, which is a major component of the Obama plan. And when we come back on Office Hours, we're going to stick with Adam Gamoran, and he's going to take us through exactly what the elements of the Obama education plan are. Please stay with us.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
For more than 100 years, the University of Wisconsin has been inspired by the Wisconsin idea,
which says the good work of the university extends to the boundaries of the state and beyond.
So the UW works hard to help build Wisconsin's economy.
Educate people of all ages.
Advance health and medicine.
And enhance the quality of life for all of us.
Hit it!
The University of Wisconsin-Madison. Forward thinking.
Welcome back to Office Hours. We're talking education policy with Professor Adam Gamoran, who is director of the Wisconsin Center for Education Research. President Obama in Madison recently. Let's hear him start to explain his plan.
In the coming weeks, states will be able to compete for what we're calling a race to the top award. We're putting over $4 billion on the table. $4 billion with a B. One of the largest investments that the federal government has ever made in education reform. But we're not just handing it out to states because they want it. We're not just handing it out based on population. It's not just going through the usual political formulas. We're challenging states to compete for it.
What are states actually going to compete for? What are some of the elements of the plan that they're trying to drive with this $4 billion?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned earlier that education policy, federal education policy, has been a surprisingly bipartisan endeavor. And we're seeing some elements of that continue. The Race to the Top plan, the demands of Race to the Top, really grow out of No Child Left Behind, but make some important changes. I would say the biggest change is the overall tone of the plan. Instead of being mainly about sanctions, it's mainly about incentives. So instead of trying to identify the failing schools and labeling them as such, this is a plan to say we're going to give more resources to states that will put in plans that will elevate the quality of education. And Secretary Duncan has gone around the country giving speeches about 4 main topics, and these topics were reinforced by President Obama in his recent visit right here in Madison. First, we need high standards that will lead young people to be college ready and career ready. As we discussed earlier, under the previous system, there were incentives for lowering the standards. So we need new standards. In addition, we need new assessments. Under the previous system, we've had assessments that have been multiple choice tests, very narrowly tailored, easy and relatively inexpensive to score, but not really getting at the depth of student understanding. And so we need better assessments. Second, we need longitudinal data systems. We need to be able to track our young people from preschool through post-secondary and into their careers. How else will we be able to tell how they're doing? We need to link those students over time to their schools and to their teachers so we can see how they're progressing with different schools and different teachers. Third, we need to turn around some of our lowest performing schools so that we have a wide variety of performance levels. When we look at international assessments, some of our states and school districts are performing at internationally laudable levels, but many of our schools are not. And we need special strategies to go into those schools and turn them around. And sometimes that means we would try to bring in a plan of action to change what's happening in that school, and sometimes it means we need to close the school and rethink it, open it up under new management with a new approach. One of the things that the Secretary is pushing is charter schools. And there's been some research lately, very controversial. I wouldn't say it's a settled matter, but some research showing that at least some charter schools can be successful, and so that's a big part of the emphasis under the Duncan plan. Finally, the fourth element, perhaps the most important of all, and that is the quality of teachers and educators, teachers and educational leaders. We need to put programs in place in our states that will improve the quality of educators and will reward our most successful educators.
So raising standards, building longitudinal data so we can actually know whether we're having an impact or not, improving the quality of educators, and really performing on those really focusing on those chronically low-performing schools. And we got $4 million to do it. When we come back on office, $4 billion with a B, as Barack Obama said. $4 billion to do it. When we come back, we'll ask you how they're going to use their leverage to try and achieve those 4 broad goals. Hope you'll stay with us on Office Hours as we discuss educational policy. Welcome back to Office Hours. We're discussing education in America with Professor Adam Gamoran in the Sociology Department and also Director of the Wisconsin Center for Education Research. $4 billion plan. In politics and in policy today, it sounds silly to say $4 billion doesn't sound like a lot of money when we've talked about $180 billion bailouts here and a $900 billion bill here. Is $4 billion a lot of money when it comes to education policy? Has it gotten people's attention?
Well, is it a lot of money? It is and it isn't. I mean, the total enterprise of education is huge in this country, but it's still a lot of money in 2 senses. First, it's more discretionary money. Secretary Duncan has more discretionary money at his disposal than all previous secretaries of education combined. So we've never seen this kind of leverage from the federal side before. And second, it's a lot of money because even if it's only a fraction of your budget, you want it, it makes a difference, it's going to get your attention. $4 billion divided by 50 states would be...
Okay. We have one more clip from Barack Obama where he's talking about how states are going to get this money. Let's listen to Barack Obama once again.
I want to get into some details about this because I want you as parents, as well as the educators, to understand what the data and the science and the studies and the research show actually make a big difference in terms of school improvement. And because that's what we were basing this stuff on. We didn't just kind of make it up. It didn't just do it because it sounded good. This is what the research shows is really going to make a difference.
They're not going to use sanctions to allocate this money, as you said, but they are going to try and leverage reforms on that research that Obama cites to get what they want of those 4 broad goals. Currently, the state of Wisconsin isn't eligible for that $4 billion. Why not?
That's right. We're not eligible, and we've been called out by Secretary Duncan and others because we have a law that says we may not use test scores to evaluate the performance of teachers. And one of the 4 assurances of the Race to the Top Fund is that you will not have such a barrier. And that is related to both the longitudinal data systems idea and the incentives for teacher and educator quality. So we've already seen, Ken, you mentioned, is this getting people's attention? We've got a bill put forward recently to change that law, and I think we will see it change. But I hasten to add that it's important that we not think of evaluating teachers only on the basis of student test scores. And the Duncan proposal doesn't have that in mind. First of all, only a limited number of teachers have students with test scores. It's only grade 3 through 8 in reading and math. So we could only be at most evaluating about 1/3 of our teachers using test scores. What about music teachers? What about art teachers? What about 10th grade social studies teachers? So we've got to have tools more than just test scores. In addition, test scores show only a narrow slice of student learning. And student learning, although perhaps the most important, is not the only goal of schooling. And so we want to be able to have richer and deeper and broader evaluations to tell us whether our teachers and our schools are succeeding. And that's one of the reasons that the Department of Education has proposed rethinking assessments, and also that we implement rigorous evaluation systems where it's not the case that everybody just gets the top mark automatically without any serious inspection, but also systems that are smart enough to realize that a score on a standardized test is not all there is to learning.
Okay. When we come back, I want to ask you what we know about what assessment systems work and what don't work. Hope you'll all join us on Office Hours as we talk about education in America and possible reforms.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
Welcome back to Office Hours with Professor Adam Gamoran, Director of the Wisconsin Center for Education Research. So Adam, forgive me if this is a naive political scientist question. You've made an argument, President Obama's made an argument, Arne Duncan's made an argument that we should be assessing schools on the value added, not just at one time, and seeing if they're doing better, and that teachers should be evaluated, and that they shouldn't only be evaluated on one thing. I gotta say, those all sound pretty common sense, non-controversial / obvious things to do. Why is this so new now, so exciting, so different?
Well, let me explain. Under No Child Left Behind, it was the first time we really shone a spotlight on school performance, on how students in each school were performing. And not only that, we disaggregated the test scores to look at the performance of each different demographic group of students in the school.
So let me just interrupt you for 1 second, though. Lots of criticism of No Child Left Behind. That's a good thing, that we were finally able to do.
Yes,
that.
absolutely. Okay. That is probably the most important advance of No Child Left Behind. And there was a fear going into No Child Left Behind that if we focused only on growth, we would be satisfied with ultimately low levels of performance among some of the most disadvantaged students in our society. President Bush called this the soft bigotry of low expectations. Now, that is an important point, but it doesn't recognize that schools have control only over so much of what students do in school. Students come to school, they bring with them differences, different performance levels and experiences and opportunities and so on. And so let
me interrupt you there. So we don't want to have low expectations, but we want to have realistic expectations, and that was the problem.
Exactly, and so we need to have a combination of attention to students' absolute performance and their growth. We need to be looking at, are schools performing high, that is, are students in the school performing at a high level, and are they making growth towards high levels? And the real problem is the one where they're performing both at a low level and their growth is not. Exactly.
So here's bad. The problem with No Child Left Behind, that you could have been here and gone to here,
And not gotten any credit for it.
And not gotten any credit. You even still could have gotten sanctions.
Exactly.
Correct?
That's right. You could have been disbanded. You could have been a school that was making progress with a low-performing group of students and disbanded because you didn't hit that, that unrealistically high barrier.
In our last couple minutes here, I think lots of people in politics and education talk about all sorts of silver bullet answers. All we need is vouchers, all we need is charter schools, all we need is higher salaries for teachers, and you hear those things from both the left and the right. From a research standpoint, what do we know about what works in terms of better educating our students, our kids?
You know, Ken, it's a much more difficult question to answer than it seems. And I think in the last administration there was kind of a naive view that we already know what to do. We just have to start doing it, and just the people aren't trying hard enough. Well, that's not the situation. Education reform is difficult and we don't have all the answers. But we do have some ideas about what works, particularly about helping children at the very early stages of their education, which is probably the most important place that we can intervene. So things like tutoring for struggling students, summer school, good, effective summer school programs that focus on academics and aren't just play. Professional development for teachers so that teachers learn how to elevate their standards and bring students to higher levels. And reducing class size in kindergarten and first grade. These are some measures that have been shown in a number of studies to be successful, particularly at the early grades. Here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we are doing research on approaches to improving student achievement. One of our biggest areas of focus is on developing the techniques to study value added so we can identify which schools and teachers are performing at high levels. Another of our focuses is on instruction for English language learners, and we have a big program of professional development to help teachers raise standards of performance among English language learners. So we're trying, and the knowledge is spreading, but it's a difficult challenge.
Adam, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your energy and your insight. From the University of Wisconsin-Madison, this has been Office Hours. Thanks for stopping by.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Wisconsin in association with the Big Ten Network.